Yo buddy, you still watching? In the year of 2006, just a mere 16 months after the release date of Ace Combat 5, Namco Bandai along with Project Aces would give us the final piece to the PS2's Holy Trinity with Ace Combat 0. But despite being the 6th game in the entire franchise, it is not a sequel but a prequel that ties into the stories mentioned in Ace Combat 5. The game itself is the same length as Ace Combat 4 with a grand total of 18 missions to be played through per playthrough. But, also due to a mechanic in the game, by technicalities there are also 55 missions, which makes Ace Combat 0 the longest Ace Combat game, but also an average length one if the player isn't aiming for 100% completion. It has features that return from both Ace Combat 4 and 5, but with a much more melodramatic story that overall didn't sit very well with some critics. The sales figures for Ace Combat 0 put it at the lowest selling out of the Holy Trinity, selling only 792,000 copies sold in its lifetime. It also reuses the engine from Ace Combat 5, which does explain its very short development time. So if you're going down the emulation path, a lot of the settings and tweaks from Ace Combat 5 will work in this game as well, even if I found that Ace Combat 0 performed better and had less technical issues than Ace Combat 5 did. Of course, in the honor of Ace Combat's 30th anniversary, I decided to challenge myself by playing the game on the hardest difficulty that is available for a new game, which is hard. So join me, buddy, as we find out what we are really fighting for in Ace Combat 0. Belka is a small country just north of the Osean Federation. It has had a long history of war with neighboring nations, with the Osean War that lasted from 1905 to 1910, an unnamed conflict with Osea in the 1940s, with motivation of expansion and nationalism, leading to clashes with Eastern Osean countries in the 1970s. These were nations such as Recta, which created the Rectan War, and in the decade after would lead to the nation's annexation. Belka, influenced by the standing Cold War between Osea and Yuktobania in the 1980s, would begin to produce their own series of advanced battlefield technologies and WMDs. These weapons would be developed by Belka Munitions Factory in the city of Sudentur. These three weapons would be Excalibur, the anti-ballistic missile laser, the XB-0 Hraesvelgr heavy command cruiser, and a mysterious Project Pendragon, which led to the development of the V2 MIRV, but would also bring about the scientific application of directed energy weapons, and this would use the massive allocation of funds from the national military budget. This would create an economic recession that would engulf the Federation, and this economic crisis ended up with national federal law being signed in by the National Assembly. This allowed smaller nations to fragment off of Belka and become independent countries. Two of these nations were Gebet and Ustio, where boundaries and political structure were not finalized until December of 1991. While smaller nations were popping up from the fragments of Belka, Osea would instill more Osean-friendly governments into those nations. An extreme far-right ultranationalist group would win a large majority of seats in Belka's government and eventually turned it into an authoritarian regime with an increased military budget. Tensions were already high between the nations of Belka, Ustio, Recta, and Gebet, and this came to head in March of 1995 when Belka would discover a source of natural resources and minerals along the southern border. This region is known as B7R and was believed to be the solution to Belka's troubles. In sweeping blitzkrieg movements, the Belkan army invaded neighboring nations, reclaiming lost land, annexing nations such as Fato, Recta, Gebet, and eventually Ustio, but gaining territory over the B7R region. This is where the player's story begins, with a lot of the weakened forces survivors gathering at Valais Air Base in the Tiran Mountains near the Rectan border. The commanders were forced to hire mercenaries and in turn created the 6th Air Division, with 2 pilots making up the 66th Air Force Unit or GALM team. These 2 pilots are Cypher and Larry Solo Wing Pixie Folk. Before we even properly get into the hangar, we get the new framing device for the cutscenes. Gone are the CGI cutscenes from Ace Combat 5. Now Ace Combat steps fully into the realm of full motion video. This is presented in the form of a reporter gathering information about the Belkan War for a documentary, which a lot of the information is shrouded in mystery since there was aggressive data destruction, intervention from other sources like the Grey Men and the Osean government themselves, and it leads Brett Thompson, who is the narrator of the story, to interviewing those that have met our player characters such as his former wingman, Solo Wing Pixie, to the aces that we also fight in the game. But this also increases the shroud of mystery about Cypher. Was he able to change the war as they said, or is this just the exaggeration of a legend? Returning from Ace Combat 4 is the traditional way that aircraft and weapons are acquired, which is good as the kill rate system, which was introduced in Ace Combat 5, was rather divisive, with some people liking it and some people disliking it. There are a grand total of 36 playable aircraft, with some unlocking naturally as one progresses through the campaign, and some having specific missions tied to them. Then there are also 3 fictional superplanes that are able to be unlocked with special requirements. Also, in a similar fashion to the older titles, is the weapon system, which allows the player before each mission to purchase a special weapon to be mounted onto the aircraft's hardpoint. And this is alongside their standard missiles. These weapons can range from multi-target missiles to potent explosives like the FAEB. As usual, the difficulty that the player chooses along with their aircraft will determine how many standard missiles and cannon rounds that they will have to be used, with far more missiles on the easier difficulties and infinite cannon ammo on anything normal or below. After the player selects their aircraft, they will also be prompted to select the weapon that their wingman will carry with them. You cannot select their aircraft this time around, and it does lead to the earlier missions being far easier, with Pixie getting the standard loadout for the F-15 Eagle, with things like the ever so hilarious QAAM. But once selected, we are now able to get into the air. Now that we have properly loaded into the first 2 missions, they are grouped together as what I will call the tutorial missions. And it is the usual, and say it with me, shoot down bombers and bomb ground targets to let the player have a low risk environment to learn how to fly their aircraft. It really is just designed so that way someone who is new to the series can just pick up a controller and play. So we proceed to take on these bombers and their not so dangerous escorts. It isn't the hardest thing in the world, and while these 2 missions play out in the background, I want to talk about the returning and new game mechanics. First off is the return of the squadron command mechanic from Ace Combat 5, and while it is just you commanding a singular wingman, these commands are acted upon instantly, so the player will have to know them off by heart, as a single button press will issue the command, unlike in 5 where they give you the chance to read the prompt before picking. They are as follows. Attack, which tells your wingman to do the obvious and attack generally what the player has in front of them at the current time. Disperse is the same as in 5, as it just tells them to go attack whatever they want, but now it has 3 options that will allow your wingman to focus on certain targets, such as ground, air, or they can just focus on both of them at once. Cover, which is the default at the beginning of every single mission, gives the order for the wingman to attack anything that has a lock on the player. This can be useful for some higher difficulty missions, but should not be relied on heavily, as sometimes the AI is a little bit slow at actually targeting the aggressive enemies on the player's tail. The 4th command is the same toggle that allows the usage of special weapons or conserves them for a later time. Thankfully, the AI seems to be a little bit better in this game, as I noticed that Pixie was actually shooting down quite a few of the enemies, compared to Ace Combat 5, where sometimes the friendly AI would just casually fly around in circles far away from the battle. This is probably because it only has to focus on 1 AI instead of 3. The other mechanic that you may have noticed in the background is that some targets may have a yellow indicator with a Y shape inside of it. Let me introduce to you the mechanic that drives the entirety of the background of the game. Aces styles. Now there are 3 types of aces that take to the skies, but there are also 2 types of yellow enemy signatures. Neutralized enemies that you have damaged and are now considered out of the fight. There are also structures that are deemed not necessary to destroy. They may be things like barracks, civilian buildings, or just non-objective targets in general. As you destroy or avoid these objects, the game keeps a tally, and then, like an honor system, will deduct or add points based on the destruction that the player causes, with 3 distinct styles that are able to be gone down, featuring different enemies, cutscenes, and dialogue based on how the rest of the characters see Cypher. You also don't have to worry about your wingman shooting them down, as the enemy in a neutralized state will not be damaged by their missiles unless you engage them. These are the different styles that you can actually choose between in the game. The Knight, which is the style that you see in the background, is the player being able to show mercy to their enemies. It is easily exploited by ruthless enemies, but is also a pilot that is there to do their objective and minimize damages to anything else. They also come to their allies' aid when required, but your honor does lead to you having less funds for purchasing aircraft. The soldier is there to do their objective. If things get damaged in the process, they aren't too worried, but they do try to minimize damage. They may also show mercy to the enemy, but can also understand that sometimes it is better not to let them have a chance to retaliate. The mercenary just doesn't care at all what happens to anyone around them. They will flatten an entire region on the way to their objective. All they care about is if they get paid and how much they do get paid. They are ruthless and dangerous, as they will also ignore allies' pleas for help, instead focusing on themselves. They also get the most money because they destroy everything. I also took a ton of damage in the second mission for some reason, reminding me that on hard difficulty, the older Ace Combat games basically only give me one get out of jail free card. Now once the final enemy is destroyed, we can go to one of the more important areas in the game. Meet Area B7R, or as they call it in the game, the Round Table, and depending on the Ace's style that the player chooses to go down, they will start at different altitudes. The objective for this mission is currently to fly into the area and be a massive distraction, while everyone else gets to go have a big military party elsewhere. The mission starts out with a dogfight that technically can be ignored, which I don't recommend, as the less enemies in the air to deal with, the better, and once they are all taken care of, we can proceed further into Area B7R. Now depending on your ace style, the enemy squadron that engages you will be different, and you will unlock a different aircraft based on who you fight. It is actually a pretty cool mechanic, but if you are on Mercenary, you will fight Rot Team with their Typhoons, Soldier gets Grun Team with the F-18C Hornet, and Knights get Indigo Team with one of my favorite aircraft of all time, the Saab JAS-39C Gripen. The fight itself was harrowing, as the Draken that I was piloting did not exactly have the best turning radius, despite actually being the best starting aircraft in the game. And this ended up with me flying in very tight circles while praying that Pixie actually managed to hit the enemy.
An interesting fight this one is.
Warning, the enemy's tracking you on radar. Indigo 1 on 2.
Hey, Pixie, you wanna help? Please? Pixie? Pixie! Pixie, take him out! Fine, do whatever you want.
I even gave him the QAAM and the power to use them. Thankfully, we managed to shoot down all of Indigo's squadron, and now that that is done, we get slapped with another new thing that the game introduces: simultaneous operation missions. Sometimes missions in the game are split into 3 separate operations that are happening at the same time. One is often mixed air-to-air and air-to-ground, one has an air-to-ground focus, and the other one is air-to-air focus. It lets the player choose what they want based on the aircraft that they have purchased or the playstyle that they really enjoy. Personally, I chose Gelnikos, which is a combined anti-air and anti-ground mission. Our objective is to take out the jamming equipment, which does a similar effect to Ace Combat 4's, where it projects a radiating circle that blocks your vision of radar. Throughout the missions is a returning feature that you can see on the screen right now, and that is the Aces mechanic. And we all know Aces from the previous games, as they are normally the enemies that you fight in the SP campaigns to unlock special camouflages for your aircraft. While in Ace Combat 0, you can actually encounter them on a new game playthrough, but there is a twist. Aces are only found on specific difficulties and on specific Ace styles. Some are flying aircraft that you also physically cannot fly, like the XB-70 Valkyrie. And this leads to there being 168 unique Aces, including the mandatory ones that the player has to fight. Thankfully, Mission 4 is rather easy to complete. No matter which one of the paths that you choose, the starting aircraft, be it the Draken, the F5, or the F1, will always have these special weapons that are able to achieve victory, no matter what. Mission 5 is a very simple escort and protection mission, as we are helping the Ocean Army's 101st and 122nd Airborne Division in the mountainous region of Solus Ortis. This is to help set up the ground invasion of Directus. All it requires is us taking out various aircraft and anti-air emplacements. We did, however, purchase a new vehicle for this mission, and that was the MiG-29, so that is pretty neat. And with the last F-16 going down, it is mission complete, and now it is time to liberate Directus, the capital of Ustio. Now, I will give you a simple warning for this mission. Do not pick an attacker aircraft like you see me doing. I chose the A-10 Warthog because I like the fact that it is a gun with a plane that is designed around it, and it makes this noise. Plus, it comes with FAEBs, which have a massive blast radius and are the equivalent of chucking a tactical nuke at a fruit fly. The mission itself is pretty simple. Take out all of the enemy defenses in the city so that way the troops can come in and liberate the capital properly. Once all of these sectors have been liberated, the player will hear bells from the city below. This is when suddenly we get a warning that new enemies are approaching us. This is the Belkan duo known as Gelb or Yellow. They are flying flanker Fs, which are far more faster and more maneuverable than the A-10. And the first time that I fought them, well, I sure hope they were tracking me on radar. It'd be kind of bad if they were not tracking me and I'm right in front of them. One's down. No, Pixie! Yeah, I got shot down, and because older Ace Combat games lack checkpoints in their missions, this means that I had to replay the entire mission up to the point where I encountered them again. This time the fight went way smoother, and even though I took one missile to the back of my aircraft, which by the way does 60% damage, I managed to take down the first of the Gelb planes as he flew in front of me and leveled himself out, and my missiles were able to connect. Now it is a 2-on-1 to hunt down the last of the Gelb squadron. Lots of chasing did ensue, but eventually as he turned to fire a missile at us, I fired one of my own and thankfully mine connected and it was mission over. Now you can hear the people cheer below. This was the true turning point in the war. Ustio is now liberated. After doing something very dumb and selling every single aircraft that I own, I managed to purchase my Gripen before the next mission, which is a pretty long mission. We are tasked with destroying the facilities along the Hydrian line. This mission will play out very similar to the arcade mode missions from Ace Combat 5, where there is a quota on the side of the screen that the player must meet within the time limit. Every enemy that you target and get a lock-on with your standard missiles or any lock-on munition will show you how many points that the target is worth, along with giving it a grade. The higher the grade, the more points that it is worth, and I have to say that the mission itself is pretty simplistic. But the density of the AA fire means that a lot of boom and zoom is required, or you know, not picking a Gripen with only RCLs will also be quite useful. Then in my infinite wisdom, I decided to attack the AA site, which has my old friend in it, the flak gun. Yeah, these things will chunk your aircraft pretty hard, and I had to limp back to the return line, which thankfully does show up in this mission so that way you can restock and repair your aircraft. It doesn't appear in every single mission, but most of the missions in Ace Combat 0 are pretty short, so ammo shouldn't be that big of a concern for the player. Of course, if you get to know me, I am a pretty stubborn idiot that learns. Sometimes. So I decided to go back to the AA site with a fresh set of rockets and try to do ranged launches at it. Now, one of the things about the M70 rocket launchers that we do have on the Gripen, they don't converge on a point like say an Apache's do. They instead get vomited in a radius and you just sort of hope that you hit the target. Of course, considering it is me piloting the aircraft, I flew a little bit too close to the AA range and got another 30% damage on my aircraft before I swooped around and managed to take out one of the AA emplacements that let me get the quota, and thus I completed the mission. Now comes a mission that I personally struggled with, and it is not for a reason that is normal. This mission took me nearly 20 minutes to complete, and it is because of the ending. Now this mission here is known as Merlin, and it is a pretty standard mission that is split into 3, seeing as the Gripen has standoff dispensers and rocket launchers. I decided to take Alpha since that has a stronger focus on anti-ground combat. Overall, that part of the mission is pretty easy as standoff dispensers let loose a line of explosives as they fly above a target, making them good for the tight cluster of enemies that are in the mission. This is despite the fact that we ended up taking out a few of the non-target items. Whoopsies, sorry, I am supposed to be the knight that is honorable, but I ended up blowing up some random things. Once that is all completed, the threat level is reduced so much that now you fly to the southeast, and once reaching the trigger point, a small cutscene will play where a bright flash of light will destroy a majority of the transport aircraft that you are escorting. Belka has deployed their laser weapon known as Excalibur towards the player's location. Now the first instinct is to fly towards the return line, correct? Take the easiest path, the path of least resistance, and get there as fast as possible. But here's the issue, the Excalibur will always fire directly ahead of you and gives you maybe 2 seconds to react to where its impact will be before it fires and sweeps towards your last known location. And all it takes is a second of contact to end your journey. I died a grand total of 3 times to this laser. This is before I learned the very simple strategy to get through this. When they announce that it is firing and you see the red dot on your radar, let off the afterburners and turn 90 degrees to one side, then immediately press on the afterburners again. The game basically wants you to notch a laser beam from the sky even though you don't have chaff or flares. Thankfully, I did manage to get across the return line even if the laser was about to hit the part that I was crossing. Thankfully, the game registers that the mission is over and it stops the laser from shooting, otherwise I probably would have died. Now we get to take revenge on the massive laser firing weapon, but of course the enemy has made it a lot harder as they place 4 jamming facilities in front of the main weapon that we have to take out first. So we take our Su-37 and get to meet our future wingman PJ. And god does his mic sound like the average Xbox 360 default mic. Then again, everyone's audio quality in this game is rather crunchy, which I suppose is a little realistic, as I'm sure everyone in the air is not going to have fancy crystal clear microphones. We are in a war, not trying to create the next podcast. The easiest way to damage the jammers is to go from one side of the map to the other in a line, as Excalibur is shooting at the player, hence the massive red line that will just randomly appear across your radar. They do block the usage of your missiles, but cannons or indirect fire will take care of them rather easily. Once all 4 of the jammers are taken care of, we need to destroy the generators that power Excalibur. Watch out for the RTLS that are around the facility. They do a ton of damage as they are basically just a small Excalibur, and barely even a second of contact brought my plane to 57% damage. Thankfully, once that is all taken care of, Excalibur itself isn't that major of a threat to us once you are close to it, and then it is slowly damaging the actual glowing light bulb that is at the top. This will take a few missiles, but I am sure that anti-ground munitions will prove more effective than my Su-35's standard weapons. Now that the main weapon is destroyed, the weapon stops firing entirely, and you just have to pepper the main body with as many missiles as you can. It will take a few passes with standard missiles, but eventually Excalibur is toppled, and you can actually see it start to tilt before it falls apart, and we have now destroyed our first super weapon of the playthrough. Now we are tasked once again to enter Area B7R, this time to fight in the largest aerial battle of the entire war, and of course we take the signature fighter of Cypher, the F-15C Eagle, and equip it with the QAAM missiles, which are still pretty strong but not as hilarious as Ace Combat 4's. During this mission, the events from Ace Combat 5 would take place with losses on both sides, including Jack Bartlett and Peter N. Beagle, and slowly as we pick off the enemy, we start to shift the tides of battle towards Osia's favor. And yes, on some difficulties in Ace's styles, you can actually see Heartbreak 1 and Huckabine as aces. While the battle is raging on, we hear a new voice over the radio, Wizard 1 or Joshua Bristow. He seems to know Pixie pretty well and talks about some sort of plan to get out of being a mercenary. As usual, once all of the enemies are down, we get to fight one of the 3 Ace teams with their unique aircraft. If on Mercenary, you will fight Schwarza team with their MiG-31B Foxhounds, Schnee team on Soldier with the F-14D Tomcat, and who we end up fighting on the night playthrough, Silber team with the F-4E. Each one of these squadrons are a full set of 5. Now here's where I'd like to point out a fun fact. When you first engage Silber team, one of the Belkan pilots will talk about how the enemy is flying Phantom jets. But if you actually look at the composition of Silber, there is a single Phantom II with the rest being F-16s. This means that the line was recorded, and the planes were most likely swapped out very late into development, and the devs never bothered to have it changed. During this engagement with Silber, 2 other aces flying Rafales will join the fight, and hey, that isn't really nice of you to do. You're just strafing me while I am attacking someone else. This is where I would also love to point out the song that plays in this mission. The music of Ace Combat is always a treat, but the amount of flamenco that is used in Zero is just perfect, and the Round Table is probably one of my favorite songs in the entire game. But once everyone is shot down, we get one of Pixie's famous quotes.
Yo, honey, you still alive?
This is also the mission where we gain the nickname of the Demon of the Round Table and get a few cutscenes with the aces that we have currently battled against, and they do change based on which style you decide to go down. Now starts what I like to call the story-heavy missions. These missions aren't very long, but instead are driving home character motivations, and they are also asking the player if they are really the good guy, but also showing off the desperation of a nation who is now pushed back into their own territory. First, we have the mission, the Inferno. It is an escort mission that Galm along with PJ are sent into Hoffnung to do some precision bombing on an industrial center. Very quickly through the mission, Pixie and PJ both notice that the precision bombing very quickly becomes indiscriminate saturation bombing, and during the mission they get into a heated argument with each other. Then while they are having their little argument, The enemy deploys some B-2 bombers and F-35s to repel us from the city. They aren't the hardest to take care of, but Hoffnung is on fire, and we get a little dialogue after the mission. Nobody knew why they were fighting anymore. That one single line shows how the entire story is unfolding. The Belkans are on the run, they have started to scorch everything so their technology doesn't fall into our hands. Meanwhile, the allied pilots like Pixie and PJ are starting to realize that some of the attacks that we have done have turned into massive destruction campaigns, and that their own motivations and convictions are being put to the test. Now our squadron priority is shifted towards the Battle of Sudentur, where South Belka Munitions Factory is located. Then as we are flying over Stier Castle in the Waldereich Mountains, our objective is suddenly changed. The one thing to note is that at the beginning of the mission, Pixie is rather downcast, almost as if something is weighing on his shoulders. But Belka has now deployed bombers to our mission area, and they are believed to contain nuclear weapons. So now we are shifted towards taking out these bombers, as we don't know which ones contain nuclear weapons and which ones don't. During the mission, you will notice that a few of the fighters in the air have the yellow signatures. These are Belkan separatists, and while they cannot damage the bombers directly, it is still rather cool to see that there are people in Belka that did not want to use the nuclear weaponry. Now, no matter what happens, whether the player destroys all of the bombers or lets them fly to the south zone, a bright white flash will occur, an explosion will be heard, and the game will put your aircraft into slow motion. Your HUD is shaking, radio communications are disrupted, and the hue becomes a sickly greenish blue color. The music of the game will also change to just being this droning sound. Everything is kind of dead. Belka has just dropped 7 nuclear weapons on its own territory. During this, Wizard 1 will show up, and after a little bit, we'll start talking to Pixie about it being his lucky day and calling him Cinderella. It is quite awkward to hear, but then this happened. I wasn't really paying attention and forgot that Pixie betrays you at this point, so I got shot down immediately and had to restart the mission. After replaying through the mission once again, I dove towards the ground this time, keeping myself close to it to avoid any of Pixie's attacks, which only occurs for around a minute before he flies off. Now a squadron of Su-27s will appear, and that becomes your target to take out, but thankfully I saved my QAAMs and was able to take out the enemies rather easily since it's a QAAM and they will just magically take out their targets when you least expect them. Pixie is now listed as MIA, and PJ becomes our permanent wingman, and all I have to say is I would rather join Pixie because the F-16 isn't as good as the F-15. I mean, we get QAAMs, UGBLs, and XLAAs. The next mission takes place in Mount Sherm, which once again was a location explored in Ace Combat 5. It had the airbase with the mountain full of nukes and the most durable mountain on the planet of Earth. But this time we are on another quota mission where our goal is to destroy 20,000 points worth of enemy equipment. Overall, it's the same as the other quota mission. It isn't very difficult, with the only thing of note during this entire thing is that there is a massive hangar that we really don't pay much attention to, but what's inside of it will come into play very, very soon. Once that 20,000 score is hit, it is mission over, and then it is on to the final overture. This is another triple split mission, and because I have Ace Combat 4 save data on my memory card, after selling all of my aircraft, I was able to purchase the XO2 Wyvern Super Fighter. Then I chose Operation Jupiter because that is the air-to-air one, and that is what the Wyvern does best. Now the mission itself is your standard air-to-air air superiority mission. There are a ton of planes and targets to shoot down, but also the enemy has deployed EA-6B and 767s to disrupt and jam you as a way to ensure air superiority even if you are the better pilot. As you can see by the footage in the background, this did not go very well for them. But a lot of the dialogue in this mission is very heavily story driven, as it was just talking about the ceasefire that was signed between Belka and Osea, and the fact that the Belkan War as we know it is over, but there are remnants that may be still fighting to the bitter end. Meet a world with no boundaries. This faction is composed of rebels from many different nationalities, from Ustio, Belka, Yuktobania, and even Osea itself. They believe that nationalism is the root cause of war, and that a world with no borders and no nations to divide people will be a world with no war. A fun fact about A World with No Borders, a lot of their ideologies are rooted in the modern Arthurian work known as The Once and Future King by T.H. White. In the first novel, The Sword in the Stone, a goose explains to the young King Arthur that geese do not wage war, because there are no boundaries among the geese, and then describes boundaries as an imaginary line on the earth, that humans were the only animal which wages war, and in the fourth novel, that the imaginary lines on the Earth's surface need to be unimagined. Thus, Arthur resolved to return to Great Britain with a new round table which had no corners, just as the world had none, and a table without boundaries between the nations who would sit to feast there. Also, as a Canadian, I'd like to say that the goose in this story was spouting some bullshit. They are territorial as hell, and there are definitely boundaries if you have ever been chased by the Cobra Chicken. This new enemy faction has bombed the city of Lumen where the peace talks were being held and the treaty was signed that ended the Belkan War. Now they have pointed their massive mobile command platform known as the XB0 Race Velger towards us. Bandai Air Base is bombed, and now our job is to repel the massive command structure as we are the only squadron that was able to take off. We chase the Race Velger down over the Waldreich Mountains where we come into contact with Sapine's renegade squadron, Espada Team. They were not hard to take care of with the two dancing in the air like a group of flamenco dancers, but now instead of admiring the enemy's flight capabilities, it is time to take down the main command structure. First, you have to take out all of its guns, which is not the most difficult thing as long as you remember that there are guns on the bottom of the command structure along with the top of it. I spent a good bit of time there wondering why my missiles never hit the guns, only to figure out that they were underneath. Now this is where I will mention a fun strategy that I personally didn't use, but it does make the mission and fight a ton easier. If you have an aircraft that can carry FAEBs and can manage to get over top of the massive structure without getting damaged, chucking one of those powerful bombs onto it will eliminate most of the targets that you have to destroy, allowing you to get it to its final phase rather quickly. Then it spawns a bunch of targets that include more guns and all of its engines. The guns that are on the tips of the structures on its wings and tails are a little bit more annoying to deal with, as sometimes your missiles will just decide that they don't want to do their job and will fly right past it. But once you destroy every single one of the guns and engines, the last target will open up to the player, the cockpit, and I got very close to actually failing this mission as the Race Velger was almost about to cross the mission boundary where I could not shoot it down, and you don't want to let that happen. That happened actually in Ace Combat 5 with the Arcbird as well. Thankfully, just 2 missiles to the cockpit are enough to knock it out of the air, and as it tumbles to the ground, we get an encrypted message that states, "Yo buddy, you still alive?" Of course, there's only one pilot that we know that will say that, and it is Pixie. He has joined A World with No Boundaries and is taunting us after we were almost bombed in the raid by the command platform. But we have tracked them down to Avalon Dam near the city of Anfang. On our way over there, towards our final sortie of the game, we are stopped by an enemy squadron over area B7R. This is where the player will meet one of 3 squadrons once again. On Mercenary, you will meet Sorcerer Team with their F-15S MTD fighters. On Soldier, the player will face Gult Team with their Su-47 Berkut fighters. And what we face is Wizard Team with their combination of F-16XL and YF-23 Black Widow fighters. The fighting is fierce with the enemy wanting to test if we are really the demon of the round table. Wizard starts off in a group of F-16XLs, and after a few of them are downed, through the power of stealth, they start to bring in YF-23s and create a massive furball. We managed to take down every single one of them with a little bit of struggle, but now we can proceed to Avalon Dam, where A World with No Boundaries has possession over the V2 mass retaliation weapon. You know, the one that was never completed until the Circum-Pacific War? It's actually here. The mission that we have to do starts out as a quick ravine run. This time, it's very easy to full throttle, especially with the quick maneuverability of the XO2 that we are flying. Once the dam is reached, our objective becomes to take out the 3 command nodes for the V2 missile. They are hidden away in tunnels and will require the player to embrace the powers of Mihai and do some ridiculously tight maneuvering. Or else you can just make multiple passes by flying in and out of the tunnel systems to pop the 4 locks around each of the command nodes. Once those locks are destroyed, the central node unlocks, and stupidly on the 3rd one, I tried to make one of those tight turns, and one of the issues is that while the XO2 is very stable, I was flying very slow and I smacked into the wall because I stalled out. So after retrying that once again, we managed to get all of the command structures popped, and finally the V2 missiles are no longer a threat to us. The war is finally over, and the game shifts us into a first-person perspective for the first time in the game. And PJ mentioned something stupid. When in war, Never mention your loved ones or proposals or something like that, you will probably end up dying. And guess what happens to PJ? A new contact appears, and a laser fires off, and PJ breaks into it and is shot down. Pixie has returned and begins the final act as he is piloting the experimental ADFX-02 Morgan fighter that actually comes equipped with 3 different special weapons. He is the only ace in the game that actually makes use of 3 different special weapons in a fight. The fight itself is a 3-phase fight, with the first phase being against the Morgan's laser system, and it is relatively easy to dodge as long as you stay behind him, and while that is being done, I want to take a second to talk about the interesting call sign of the protagonist. Cypher, which has the same Arabic root word which literally means empty or nothing, and in mathematics can also stand as the number 0, but is rarely used as such for the modern day. But another definition of the word cipher is someone that has no weight, worth, or influence, and juxtaposes the fact that we, according to the story, influence the entire events of the Belkan War and the events that happen afterwards with a world with no boundaries. With the final part of the cipher name being the thing that a lot of people know, which is a method to transform text to conceal its meaning. There was a lot of work behind the scenes after the Belkan War to hide the true nature of the war, meaning that while Cypher here helped win the war, that some information is best left hidden to the public eye, and Osea and Belka worked a lot to make sure that none of that information got out. Once enough damage happens to Pixie, the second phase begins where he starts to fire multi-purpose burst missiles at the player. So while you have to dodge every single missile he tosses at you, you have to attempt to get in as many hits as you can yourself. And while we are having that go on in the background, I would love to talk about the gorgeous use of the soundtrack that Project Aces did for this game. Zero is an iconic song that a lot of people love to use, mixing together Latin speech, flamenco, which Japan is actually known as the second home of it right behind Spain, plus the design of a singular red wing on a plane that when looked at from the front looks like a rampaging bull, but also the usage of a flamenco song in a duel against a great adversary. The telling of a tale steeped in European mythology, it just befits it all perfectly. After the second phase is completed and the third phase begins, from the Morgan, Pixie is able to launch the V2 missile up into the air, a timer will appear and he activates, as I call it, some Belkan bullshit, as the plane is coated in an ECM that deflects missiles as it's supposed to, but also deflects bullets. Bullets are not electronic the last time I checked, but that means you have to fight the bull head on when he delivers his famous line. This was the cleanest Pixie fight I have ever done, and I will let it play out for you guys.
We completed analysis of the enemy craft. Codename Morgan. This plane is protected by an ECM defense system. Its only weak point is in the front air intake. You'll have to attack it head on. Go, take down Morgan. You're the only one who can stop him. Demon Lord of the Round Table, I pray for your success. You and I are opposite sides of the same coin. Gone 1, go for his front air intake. When we face each other, we can finally see our true selves.
Oh yeah, got him in 4. Let's go. First try.
Wyvern's better than the Morgan. The dragon took out the wizard. Once Pixie is shot down, Ace Combat Zero comes to a close, and we get a few more cutscenes involving the aces that we shot down. We get to see the lady half of the Espada team, see that Wizard 1 got put in jail again, and then get to finish by talking to Pixie, who is now fighting for Yuja during the events of Ace Combat 4. This is where he delivers us one final message, and it is an iconic one.
Yo, buddy. Still alive? And thanks, friend. See you again.
Ace Combat Zero doesn't feature as many unlockable bonuses as previous games like Ace Combat 5 and Ace Combat 4. This can be chalked up to its quicker development time. However, returning from the previous games is the SP campaign playthrough that allows the player to keep all of their weapons, aircraft, and currency from a previous playthrough, Do also be warned that it will carry over the last style that you were playing, so if you were a knight in your first playthrough, your second playthrough you'll start completely on the knight side and will have to work your way across if you want to get to mercenary. Upon completing the campaign with any of the Ace's styles, the player will be rewarded with a color scheme that matches the Ace style completed, with the 3 color schemes having special effects on 3 aircraft. The Soldier color scheme for the F-22A Raptor is Mobius 1, the Mercenary color scheme for the Su-37 is Yellow 13, the Soldier color scheme for the F-14D Tomcat is the Rosgrees colors from Ace Combat 5. There is an Area 88 reference for the F-20A Tiger Shark with the Night color scheme. Also returning from the previous games is the free mission mode, where the player can select a mission that has been completed and on the style that they chose to play, along with the free flight mode if they want to explore the environments of the game. Having an Ace Combat 4 save file on your memory card and completing the first mission, or completing the game twice with different Aces styles, will unlock the XO2 Wyvern from Ace Combat 4. Having an Ace Combat 5 save file on your memory card and completing the game on all 3 Aces styles, or completing the game and getting Supreme Knight, Supreme Mercenary, and Supreme Soldier medals, will unlock the ADF-01 Falcon Fighter and the ADF-X-01 Morgan, which is like Pixie's Morgan but cannot carry all 3 weapons. The Gauntlet is unlocked for free mission mode once defeating all 11 major enemy Ace squadrons. It is a boss rush style game mode where the player without a wingman must take on the Aces of the game. If the player defeats the Espada team within 60 seconds, they can fly against Mobius 1 in a sort of true final boss type moment. This mode is strictly non-canon. Upon completing the campaign on hard, the expert difficulty is unlocked, and once the expert difficulty is completed, the ace difficulty will unlock, similar to Ace Combat 4. Completing the game on ace difficulty with all 3 styles with S ranks on every single mission, meaning that you will have to play 55 missions where 1 missile can end everything, you will get a decorated hangar with the GOM team and Ustio flags. Upon completing the game, the player will also unlock the classics of the CG viewer to view cutscenes from the campaign, and the music player to listen to any song that is found in the game's files. One of the side things that is not really a bonus to mention is the Assault Records, which is a checklist of the various aces that the player has shot down during their time playing the game. This will include things like their name, age, and what nation they were allied to, along with what mission they were shot down in. But it will also detail things about the pilot, like why they joined their faction and what happened to them if they survived after the war. At the end of the day, Ace Combat 0, despite being far shorter than Ace Combat 5, does tell a story that the players were probably curious about after learning about Pops, the 8492nd, and other Belkans during Ace Combat 5's story. It shows it in a very melodramatic and charming way, why the Belkans began their plotted revenge, and it does it fantastically, and it really makes you think if the Belkans were truly madmen that lost their way like Robok, or were just people that were swept up in the political turmoil of the time, and were willing to do anything to bring their nation back from the brim of collapse. I can say personally that I do like Ace Combat 0 quite a lot. The music is mixed perfectly with the classic gameplay of Ace Combat, and surprisingly there wasn't a mission that I could say was overtly boring. The idea of the honor system that makes the player think about their actions in the air is nice as well. It makes them choose whether they want to shoot down certain enemies, or whether for the sake of their wallet they just decide to obliterate everything. I also like the characters of the game. Amongst the chatter of war, you have characters like Pixie who have the idea of getting rid of war but go through it with a lack of a moral compass that believes that wiping out everything and starting from zero is the way to go. But there are also characters that juxtapose that, like PJ, who may seem a little bit annoying at first, but his personality grows on you. But they also gave the enemy aces a personality that lets you really see why they acted the way that they did. That they were fighting for what they believed in, and they honestly thought that that was what was right for their country. It makes it also so that way you want to play through the game for a second or third time just to see what changes between the different routes. And the game is short enough that you can play through the entire game in a couple of hours. It doesn't take long to get through Ace Combat 0. In my honest opinion, it takes the best parts of Ace Combat 4, adds in a few sprinkles of Ace Combat 5, and still manages to deliver a fun game about a pilot that lacks any blood in their circulatory system, being able to take on God or something with an F-22, but draped in an Arthurian mythology that Project Aces during this era had decided to pick. Now on the chopping block for Ace Combat is the PSP game, the real terrible Game Boy game, and then it's on to Ace Combat 6. I have also decided, like I mentioned in Ace Combat 5, that I will not be playing X2 and Assault Horizon, as they will be done separately, as they are not considered mainline games and take place in our world instead of Strange Reel. I also do have my coffee, and if you want to support the process of making the videos, it's only $1 a month. link in the description, and you can get bonuses like having your name pop up in the credits of the next video. But for now, we have found what we wanted to fight for, buddy, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.